Okay, everybody, I'm delighted to welcome you all here to this policy exchange debate about bridging Britain's skills gap. I'm Siobhan Kennedy. I'm the business correspondent at Channel 4 News. Just some very brief thoughts at the beginning of this debate. The UK, as we know, is sort of gradually hoarding itself back into economic growth. The sun, as we were told yesterday by our Chancellor, is appearing over the hill. But in order to capitalise on that growth and drive it forward, business really needs to start investing in more technology, machinery, and crucially in people and in skills. And here we still have one of the biggest problems that businesses face. We hear is their inability to find employees with the right skill sets to match their requirements. Now, despite, as it seems to me, successive attempts by various governments to address this problem, there still seems to be a worrying mismatch between education and training and the actual skills that businesses really require. We know the key problem areas: engineering, IT, science, oil and gas, but there's also a very worrying, persistent lack of numeracy, literacy, maths and English skills in both the workforce itself and in school leavers and college leavers coming into the workforce. So clearly something needs to be done, something needs to change if we are to capitalise on this growing economy and make Britain more competitive rather than simply hiring in experts and skilled workers from overseas. One key area here, there are many, but one key area seems to be an overhaul of the apprenticeship system. And while there have been increasing numbers of apprentices, which is to be applauded, that doesn't yet seem to have translated into a profound effect, at least, on the employment market. We still obviously have big youth unemployment, and that is staying stubbornly near the million mark. We will talk about this today, but one thing that employers seem to be asking for, or at least asking for a debate on, is that more of the financial and curriculum control of apprenticeship schemes is passed to them, that they have more control, and that perhaps that will lead to apprenticeship schemes with better status and standing, the likes of which we see in Germany and Austria, etc., where youth employment is low. The key government consultation on the funding part of that, I understand, is closed today.
Yes.
We are lucky enough to have...
It closes today, actually.
If anybody wants to have an opinion, you can quickly get it in here. We're lucky enough to have Matthew Hancock, the Minister in charge of this big problem, with us here today. We'll hear from him in a minute. And then we'll hear from Clare, who is actually a real business from Heathrow, doing this stuff in reality, and will talk to us about some of the challenges that she faces. She is Corporate Affairs Director there. Then we'll hear from Mark Beatson on my left here, who is Chief Economist at the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. And then finally from Matthew Oakley on the end there, who is Head of Economics and Social Policy at Policy Exchange. Now, I'm reliably informed that the panellists here are all going to keep to their 7 minutes. We're starting with the Minister. We'll hear from them, and then obviously we'll pass it over to you. So I'm going to hit go on my stopwatch and let...
Well, thanks, Siobhan. It'll be much easier for me to stick to 7 minutes because you basically gave my speech for me in my introduction. But that's good. The way that you've set up the discussion is very similar to how I think of the problem. So the economy is clearly recovering, but we have this youth unemployment, which thankfully is falling a bit, but is still much too high, and has been too high for a long time and precedes the crash. And at the same time, as I talk to businesses, this morning I had a speed dating session with about 100 businesses, and the problems of skills shortages is a persistent one. And step back and ask the question: why is government involved at all in provision of skills? And it's because there is a market failure in two ways. The first is that for provision of education under the age of 18 is free, and obviously hugely important to. It's free to the people who receive it. It costs taxpayers, but it's a good investment. But then amongst adults also, it's much easier for a company to poach a highly skilled person, whether domestically or from overseas, whether from a competitor company or a competitor country, than train up. And you can have in a country a low skills equilibrium, so to speak, as an economist might call it, where people poach from each other and therefore they don't bother putting the training in. Or you can have a situation where people collaborate in skills and training, even though they compete vigorously in their product markets, and where we train young people into jobs rather than taking the easy option of looking overseas. And we are trying to shift the economy into the second of those spaces, and that's why it's an important. There's an important role for government funding, and of course, as you say, as you implied, the primary goal, tool that we have to deliver this is through the apprenticeship program, which is rapidly developing, and we're getting closer to it becoming the norm that you either go into an apprenticeship or to university when you leave school, which is the goal, which is the social convention in some countries which get this very right, like Germany. I'd add Switzerland to your list as well, and interestingly Japan. Well worth looking at the Japanese system. And Japan is probably the only country in the world where the parity of esteem issue is close to being solved. People often talk about Germany, but still in Germany, people would rather probably, on average, go to university. So, so how are we trying to tackle this? Through two big picture principles. The first is rigour. I think we'll only get vocational education recognised and valued as highly as academic if the training is truly as valuable. I think that for too long, people have muddled up the fact that vocational training is open to all and to people who, whether they've succeeded or not in the academic space, with the need for it to be stretching and difficult and high quality. And just because somebody hasn't achieved in the past doesn't mean you shouldn't stretch them in the future. And that error, a sort of intellectual error, has led to not enough focus on rigour, because the focus instead has been on universalism. You can be both rigorous though and universal, open to everybody, but still stretching and challenging and demanding. So rigour, and then responsiveness. Responsiveness to the needs of employers. For too long we've had two separate systems, ecosystems. I sit in the Department for Education and Department for Business, and they feel very different, and the education sector feels very different from businesses. And this predates the fact that we have two rather different Secretaries of State. It's a very long-standing question, and one that we're trying to solve. But we can't solve it, we can't get more enterprise into the education system throughout schools, colleges, and universities. We can't do that by me mandating it, because that's the very opposite of what we're trying to achieve. So instead, we've given a lot more freedom to the system, both schools through the academisation programme, and colleges, where we took off a huge amount of bureaucracy and central direction. And then hold to account much more firmly the leaders of much more autonomous institutions, especially to the outcomes that they achieve, not just exam results, very important as they are, but also the destination that kids reach in time. And then make sure that the funding system supports rather than gets in the way of that goal. So that's all the big picture direction and the vision and the strategy in 6.5 minutes. So I'll use my extra 30 seconds to say where specifically the three areas I'm most passionate about are the introduction of tech levels. This is for under 18s, for kids to go into, if they go into a vocational space, to go into something that is recognised by employers as valuable. The introduction of traineeships, which is an overarching envelope for a huge amount of activity that was going on, but in a more structured way, to help people who can't yet hold down a job into a job, give them not only the English and maths, but also the work preparation, the character skills that you need to be able to hold down a job, which is vital and I think has been missing from our education system. And then of course the reform to apprenticeships, both funding wise, getting co-funding in, and we're consulting on how, but getting so that I get better value for taxpayers' money because I'm only putting money in where the employer is also prepared to put money in, and instead of listening to the employer voice, actually watching where they spend their pounds. And also getting employers much more involved, in fact, holding the pen on the design of the qualification. And we'll be coming forward with more on that very soon. But to employers in the room, I urge you, get involved in this programme and this process of reforming our apprenticeships, because I can't do it. And I don't know what should be in any given apprenticeship programme, and it's wrong for me or my officials to try to make those decisions. We make big picture decisions about the structure of the new apprenticeships, and then the content has to be driven by employers, and hopefully that will try to drive together the world of employment and the world of education, so that we can give more kids a chance.
Not bad, 7:29. Well, let's hear from one of those employers now first. Over to you, Clare from Heathrow, Clare Harvard.
Great, thanks very much. Great to be here. If you want a world-class airport that joins your markets and your trade and facilitates growth for the UK, then you need a world-class workforce. And our skills programme and our apprenticeship is absolutely the cornerstone of building skills at Heathrow. Heathrow has a very wide-ranging need of skills, both on the technical side, on the retail side, customer service side. So it's a really diverse skill set that we need at Heathrow, and we need the very best. This is the entry point to the UK, this is the gateway, and the first impression and last impression of professionalism and really skilled professional workforce is at Heathrow, so really important for the country and for our business. Heathrow is actually the second biggest job site in the UK after Canary Wharf. So there are 76,000 people working at Heathrow, so a really big workforce that we really need to invest in, and it's really important for our business that these people have the right skills. So at Heathrow, our apprenticeships are in three key areas. Our engineers, really important to the business, and I'm glad to say lots of women engineers coming through, which is fantastic. We've got working with our retailers, we have our Heathrow Academy, working with our retail partners in the terminals, doing all those retailing and customer facing skills, really important. And then with our airline and construction colleagues as well. So those are really important areas at Heathrow. Also work incredibly closely with the local community. This is where 20% of our employees come and live. And very important to us to work with our community to make that partnership in the area. We work with schools, we work with the local colleges, we do job fairs, we go into the primary schools and the secondary schools. I've been with our senior colleagues actually working with those primary school kids saying, have you ever thought about being an engineer at Heathrow? There are great jobs at baggage handling, but there are fantastic jobs at Heathrow as well, and so we're really keen to build that. So, engineering apprenticeships, we've been running them for 25 years. We invest 200,000 in each apprentice. We have got over 400 apprentices over that time, and the great news is that 70% of them continue to work in our business afterwards. Really important, that continuity. Our chief engineer was an apprentice. Our other great apprentice who's coming through now, who started off 20 years ago, Giles Price, is running our expansion programme at Heathrow. So these guys are coming up through the ranks and having fantastic careers at Heathrow. So really important are engineers, and we start them off on 16,000. Day one, by the end of 4 years, they've got 24k. So they have really good pay and really important to keep them on board as well. The other really exciting thing at Heathrow, you may have heard or not, we are building the biggest private sector infrastructure project in Europe. It's Terminal 2, it's generating 30,000 jobs. It's being built right now to go on stream next year. All those apprentices at Heathrow and with our partners at Balfour Beatty and Langer Rourke, to name but a few, those apprentices are on a real live site where they're learning on the job. So really exciting, a fantastic project at Heathrow to really give those apprentices real live experience. So really important for us for Heathrow, our apprentices, really important training those skills, really important for community, and really important that partnership with education, working with them, working in the local college. They have time at the college, then they come on site, actually to Heathrow or at Terminal 2, and really live the jobs that they're being trained for. I think for us, working with education is important, and working in part of a broader strategy really about government is seeking that new demand and where are those new skills coming from, and working with the local community, identifying and working with the schools. You've got a great career in the location. So that's Heathrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Now let's hear from Mark.
Thanks very much. How good is the UK at skills? And we'll find out next Monday, because the OECD are doing for the first time, a big international study which actually compares, it gives people the same tasks. You're not comparing qualifications, you're actually comparing how well do people solve problems. I suspect it'll find that, as usual, we're pretty middle ranking and highly unequal. We've got a relatively high share of people at the top end in terms of qualifications, but also quite a lot at the bottom as well. I guess if we're looking forwards, when are we going to start seeing skill shortages starting to cause problems for industry? Yes, even in the recession, there have been particular problems around certain highly skilled areas, but most measures of skill shortages have fallen. But are we going to see this be the next big sign of something that feeds up into pay pressures and influences the Bank of England's judgment on, for example, interest rates? Our research so far suggests it's not happening, but it could do in the future. Just to pick up Anne and Christine on infrastructure projects, I think these are both challenges and opportunities. If you think about something like building, for example, a nuclear reactor or a new airport, for example, these are lumpy, long-term projects. It's not easy to maintain and assemble the skills to do that. So it needs planning and foresight, and that can be a real challenge if you leave it too late, because if suddenly find out, of course, you haven't got enough people to actually sort of do the jobs you need to do. On the other hand, and think about something like nuclear engineering, for example, we haven't built a nuclear reactor for 30 years. So you're essentially having there to create skills from scratch again. And that's an area where sort of the big companies and public authorities and supply chains are getting together to help solve that problem. What are employers doing? They're actually doing quite a lot in terms of investment. The figures suggest that in real terms the investment in training has fallen a little bit during the recession, but certainly by no means as much as, for example, capital equipment. So employers are continuing to train the workforces. And the numbers vary, but possibly over £40 billion worth. But I think there is a question about, if we think again back to that sort of UK population, which has sort of got quite a lot of people with relatively low levels of educational qualifications and general skills competences. How do we achieve that sort of general uplift in skills? And sort of some of the research that we haven't published it yet suggests that particularly amongst low-paid workers, the training that employers are providing is very much about training to get the job done. And where employers are investing in in a sense, in developing their workforce, that tends to be people higher up the hierarchy who are in or are thought capable of management positions. And so I think there is a question there about to what extent is the current system going to be able to deliver pay progression for people in perhaps the bottom half of the earnings distribution. And let's think a little bit finally about sort of age structure. I think I'll probably agree that apprenticeships are the long-term answer, but in this context, that's a 40-year job. And you've got to think then about actually people who are already out of the formal education system, who've got 30, 40, maybe more years working life ahead of them. And of course, as a society, we all need people to work longer. What about people who are trying to change careers? If we live in a world where technology and business models are changing, some people will actually find that the type of work they were doing essentially isn't relevant any longer, opportunities don't exist. If you put all that risk on the individual, there's a lot of cost there, there's a lot of risk. So how can policy and businesses make it easier for individuals to be able to manage those changes? Can we think about instruments, for example, such as insurance or repayable loans, as a way of helping people in later life be able to sort of acquire the skills and education to be able to change jobs? I think that's going to be a long-term question. At the moment, it's the Cinderella of the system, but we're all eventually going to be in that older workforce, and there's little support out there at the moment, so that's the point I'd finish on.
Thank you very much. And let's hear finally from Matthew for Policy Exchange.
Super, thank you very much. I want to start by just saying how much of an important issue this is. So, over the last 3 weeks, we've been at all the party conferences talking about a whole bunch of different things. Quite a lot of what I've talked about has been around the future of the UK and the global economy. Kind of building on, we've talked over the last year or so around the global race and how Britain can compete in the future. And I don't think we can underestimate how much of a challenge that is. So we've been talking at a range of different fringe events about how Britain can actually take advantage of the global changes that are going on, the changes in consumption, the emerging markets, and the huge rise in competition across the globe. And I think there's some interesting kind of ideas coming out of the last couple of days. Particularly yesterday, we had an event on industrial strategy and industrial policy, talking about the need for government to be an active but supportive rather than kind of guiding partner with business, and the need for both to both look at kind of exports and exporting to emerging markets, but also to keep attracting people and businesses to the UK. Underlying both of those areas was and is and are skills, and the idea that to really compete in the global economy, we need to have a skilled workforce, and a workforce that has the right kind of skills to kind of take us where we need to go. I think those points are pretty bloody obvious, to be honest. But I think what is less obvious sometimes is that actually there's another side of the skills debate, and that's much more around society. So skills are hugely important to the economy, but they're also hugely important for building a society which is kind of structured together and actually can get on, essentially. So I think I want to focus a bit on that and actually argue that if we are going to return to growth, we are going to continue to grow, we need to have a model of growth which builds up skills across the whole distribution so we can actually have a fair or kind of a shared growth economy. In those kind of areas, I think there's some quite big problems already. So before the recession, we had 4 million workless individuals in the economy. Productivity was below some of our major competitors. 50% of people leaving school at 16 without 5 HSCs, including English and maths. And looking at the other side of things, even during the recession, we had huge rise in unemployment, although not as high as many economists feared. Even despite a huge rise, I still spoke to many businesses who said, actually, we can't find people to employ that we need. We can't grow because we can't get the people into the jobs that we have. Some examples which are often used, we're talking about 40,000 gap of engineers, 180,000 gap in technicians. These are all quite big challenges for the future, and both a challenge, both a challenge for the economy, but also socially. So I want to talk very briefly about where I think some of these issues are coming from, and then where I think the challenges are for Matthew and others leading up to 2015 and beyond. So where are these issues coming from? Again, I'm not going to rehearse the arguments in great detail, but people here know that it's about globalisation, technological change, and the characterisation of the UK labour market, which is being hollowed out. So you have a bunch of growth in jobs at the top of the labour market and a bunch of jobs growing at the bottom. So the kind of skilled professions or semi-skilled professions that people need to progress into, have a career and grow into, is characterised as largely being removed now. I'd actually argue that perhaps that isn't what is happening, which is probably a strange point of view for many people. Actually, what I think happens, and I think this has been shown in the past, is even when you have technological change which hollows out the current labour market, it creates a whole bunch of new middle-ranking, middle-skilled jobs somewhere else. And eventually the skills system, the education system gets around to dealing with that, and people then fill up that part of the labour market. The point here is that we need a skills system and education system which is hugely flexible to allow that to happen. And that presents, I think, both a short-term and a long-term challenge. In terms of solution, the long-term solution, my fundamental belief is that this is about giving the right signals to people as they're growing up in terms of what they should be taking on, the education they should be having, and what sorts of skills and training they need. It was encouraging to hear Clare talking about the female engineers. I think that's hugely positive. The last time I heard a survey on this, I think stat was that someone going into a school and asking 12 and 13-year-old girls whether they'd even consider a job in engineering, I think 1% said yes. And that to me is absolutely frightening when there's a huge, huge shortage of engineers in the UK. So it's about, I think, business being much more proactive. There's a really interesting example here of a business going into schools and thinking more imaginatively about how they can encourage people to do different things. The example they used was insurance. Being an economist, insurance is probably even more dull than economist stuff. So they sold insurance by talking about insuring Beyonce's bottom, or insuring Tiger Woods' hands. It's not about homes, it's not about cars, it's about real life things which are really interesting. And actually, once they've gone in and come out again, more people would actually take on or think about taking on jobs in insurance and knew how to get into that position. So I think that kind of scheme is really, really helpful to give those real life examples of why it's interesting and where it could be going. Given that I'm a major welfare geek, it could be wrong if I didn't talk about the welfare state. And I think this also has a role to play in that. And I think this is building on what the coalition's definitely done very well, and also the announcements yesterday from the Chancellor, talking about actually we can't support people continually if they continue to fail in the labour market. We need to send that signal out that you need to be doing all you can to find work, get into work, and retrain and get new jobs. If we don't do that, I think we will risk people not getting the right skills to move into that new part of the labour market. And I think that's a huge generational challenge. The second area, so that's kind of the long-term solution as I see it, is working much more heavily within schools. The second area, I also build on kind of welfare point, is what to do with people, how to help people who are currently unemployed and don't have the right sorts of skills to get into work. This is a little bit about retraining, and I think Mark's points here are really interesting about how you incentivise people, or how you government might help people to take on the costs of retraining at the same kind of level. So not progressing their skills, but getting the same kind of level of skills, but in a different area. It's also about integrating skills and things like the work programme the government is running. So how do we allow work programme providers to make the most of BIS funding to train people who are unemployed to take the jobs that they need? The final area I want to talk about, and it's again around flexibility. We need so we need the long-term solution. We need to help people retrain and be flexible, but we also need flexibility and to accept that actually we can't necessarily grow all of our own skills. I don't think we'll ever be able to do that. So we need to have a much more balanced and sensible debate around immigration. We need to have to let businesses bring the right people they need to fill short-term gaps in their businesses, and that has to be done in a much more sensible way than both this current government and the previous government was doing. Probably a contentious issue with this audience, but hopefully want to discuss later. So I think there's three kind of key areas: long-term, linking up with welfare, immigration, big questions, and I look forward to kind of a policy up to 2015 and beyond.
Great, thank you very much. We've heard now from all our panellists. Given we only have half an hour, actually 25 minutes, I think I should just throw straight to you and let you ask your questions. If you could just state your name and your organisation or affiliation, and if your question is directed to somebody in particular, that's fine. If not a general, then we'll try and get a load of answers for you. Let's start with that gentleman that you're right beside there. Yeah.
Thanks very much. David Finlay, and I'm chair of the National Youth Agency. Clearly this problem of youth unemployment is a concern. About 1 in 5 unemployed, just under a million. And it's certainly reassuring to hear the good things which are going on to try and address that. I think it's not just a social problem for today, but also if we are going to bring about the economic recovery, and huge amounts of government money is going into physical infrastructure, which will create a country which hopefully will be a great business centre. But you actually need the people to drive that economic recovery forward. And my concern is that with so many young people not in work, there is a danger that we just won't build up enough people in their 20s with really good work experience behind them so that they come through into key positions and able to drive that economic recovery when we've got the physical infrastructure. I just wonder whether the panellists have got views on how we can get that balance right between investment in physical infrastructure and investment in people, because actually I think you need both to be going ahead in parallel.
I'll take three at a time, I think. So let's go to the lady here with the striped jacket.
Thank you. Good to hear at Heathrow about the partnership with colleges, and certainly BAE, for example, works very closely in Preston with Runshaw College, Rolls-Royce very closely with Derby College, and they say that fusion actually makes for the highest quality education and training and apprenticeship programmes from their experience. And linking to the point from National Youth Agency, I'm a governor of a college, and we've been reviewing very carefully the curriculum offer to make sure that we're attracting and engaging those not in employment, education and training, and that there are those, the royal staircase I think was referred to in another session, so that there are those routes through the colleges into apprenticeships and high quality programmes very closely connected with employers. So I think it's both and. It's both the employers themselves as the magnet, but also we've got a fabulous sector, FE college sector across the country that's also drawing in and engaging young people. All of this relies on expert teachers and trainers.
Yeah.
That it's interesting with the report that's been tabled. There's a lot about physical plant, there's a lot about investment in that kind of infrastructure, and not enough, I think, where we're thinking carefully about how that teaching and learning and how that efficient, effective learning happens best. So I think the partnerships are absolutely crucial.
Yeah, yeah.
Question here at the front.
Paul Jackson from Engineering UK. Sorry, microphone. Right, Paul Jackson from Engineering UK. Just a point on the young women and their interest in engineering careers, which is improving. We've just done a survey which has shown 11 to 14-year-olds now, 22% of young women in that age group see an engineering career as desirable. That's good, but the boys, it's kind of 60%. By the time those young women have given up subjects that would allow them to pursue an engineering career, the number is close to 70%. It's actually equal across the gender divide. So the breadth of education is an issue for us. I wanted to pick up on the comment that Matthew made about the changing relationship of business in supporting schools. We do a lot of work in bringing businesses together, indeed including the good people from Heathrow who are active in our Big Bang Fair, and getting their efforts coordinated so that they, rather than perhaps going back to the same schools each time, they get a variety of schools and they have full broad careers information and so on. That seems to work very well. I wonder whether both Matthews would see a role for government in helping to facilitate that, certainly not doing it, but helping to facilitate it. My impression is that the engineering community in the past tended to go and tell young people what they must become. You know, we told them they must become a mechanical engineer or something, and I think we're getting better at showing them what they could be involved with, and that breadth of opportunity, which means it could be medical devices, it could be clean water, and so on. So I'd be interested in your views on that.
Let's try and answer those. We'll answer that one first. Go to the Minister. Role for government to help facilitate exactly...
Yes, this is really a really important part of getting this right. There is a this debate used to be called the Careers Advice and Guidance, Information Advice and Guidance debate. The problem with that name is that it implies that there are careers advisors as a separate breed of individuals, whereas everybody gets careers advice from all sorts of different people and places. And these days, actually, the information is widely available on the internet. The question is is guidance and mentoring and enthusiasm and inspiration. So I'm trying to change the culture around the answer to this question. There is undoubtedly a role for a brokerage between schools and employers to make it easier for each to interact, as well as the holding schools and colleges to account for delivery on this both through Ofsted, who will now put the delivery of this into their judgment on a college's or school's leadership and management, which is always one closely followed by the principal or head teacher, and then of course destination data. But you know, what I don't want to do is say this is how it must happen in every school or college. What I do want to do is make the enthusiasm of literally hundreds of thousands of people have an easy channel to be delivered. And I'll give you one example which I found really satisfying. We're now saying that the destination of where you get to after a college course, you do get into a job, into an apprenticeship, into continued education, university, is important. We're publishing those data. So colleges, around 10% of colleges now have an employment agency on site who works with the kids in their last year, for a whole year, starting with asking. So CV writing is not, okay, how are you going to format the CV on the page? It's get them a year before they leave and say, okay, what have you done that you can put on your CV? Have you got any work experience? No. Okay, so let's get some more work experience. Let's help you get some. Have you done a Saturday job? Have you done paid work experience, having started with unpaid? To build this ladder so that when people leave, they've got not only a nice looking CV, but a more full one. The best single thing about that, which I've come across in colleges around the country, is that I didn't know anything about it until it happened. And it was the incentive structures put in the system that is delivering loads of different solutions to this problem, and it's just starting, but there's much more to do.
This brokerage you talked about, Minister, that's something that you think government would be prepared to set up in answer to Mr. Jackson's question?
I think it's a role for the National Career Service in future.
Right, okay. Did you want to have a quick comment on that?
No, sounds great.
Great,
Sounds
perfect. And then the first question we haven't dealt with yet, the balance between investment in infrastructure and investment in people, from the gentleman from the National Youth Agency. Does anyone want to have a go at that one?
I mean, just to note that if you look at business investment, then if you look at the balance between what's called tangibles and intangible assets, that is hard stuff like machines, computers, etc., and the intangibles, which is basically investments in people and knowledge and organisations, then these days businesses spend a lot more on intangibles than they do on tangibles. So actually already the balance of investment is increasingly moving towards that as we move towards a more knowledge-driven economy. So in a sense, we're working with the trend there, and there's quite a lot of investment going into trading. Having said that, I mean, I think the point that the speaker made about the danger here of essentially, it sounds slightly melodramatic term, but the lost generation. One does have to take that seriously, and it's just tied back to the previous discussion. I don't think that is just a question of the recession. Unemployment, I think, amongst young people started trending about 2002. So I think this is a broader issue about the transition between school and work, and it seems to be getting longer and harder than it used to be.
More questions. Can we try and stick to questions? I know everybody likes to have their say, but we will run out of time. We are literally probably only have 15 minutes left. So let's hear from the two ladies on the front. We'll get to everybody. But
hi, Tricia Hartley from the Campaign for Learning. We've heard some really encouraging things and some quite depressing things, and I think from Matthew Oakley we heard great stuff about the new jobs that might come into that hollowed out bit of the economy, but then you said, and eventually the education system catches up with that. And I'm wondering what the panel thinks we could do to help the education system catch up a bit more quickly so we don't lose a generation of young people in the meanwhile.
Support Michael Gove.
Hi, Michelle Sutton. I'm Chief Exec of Bradford College Group, and I'm the President of the Association of Colleges. Now, I've been in FE I was in the industry for 11 years, and I've been in FE for 32 years. Most of it was teaching at the early stages. And for all of that time, I worked with employers about trying to give them what they wanted. And not all of them can articulate the need in the same way as Heathrow can. And it is very difficult until the employers are able to tell us what they want, how they want it, when they want it delivered. Well in advance, somebody mentioned, didn't you, this long time, I think it was Mark, the long time it takes to actually build a curriculum that you need. And I'd be really interested in the panel's ideas of how we can help some businesses, big ones but mainly SMEs, actually articulate, create the vision for the future and look to what skills they need for the future.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big difference, Claire, between what you're able to do, isn't there, and what a small and medium business is able to do. How do you see you obviously you have advantage with size there, don't you?
Yes, but just going back to helping that almost that conversation between what business needs, whether it's big, small or whatever, and what the employer needs, and I think that is absolutely critical. And for us, working with the education, and not just at secondary school, we get into the primary schools on our hands and knees saying, you know, have you thought about building a terminal with paper sticks and all the rest of it? And they just get so excited. So you need to get in early, but that relationship, that partnership with the schools is absolutely critical, and with the colleges. But there's another part of it as well, which is working with the community more broadly. I mean, we go into the community with the local employers, and we have job fairs, and we have career days. Bring the family, bring mum, bring granny, the whole 9 yards. They all come, they see the businesses, and they, you know, the schools and all the rest of it. And it's a community day, and they start really understanding what the opportunity is in the area, because Heathrow is, if you like, a hub of lots of different businesses, not just us. And I mean, my actual company, we have a workforce of 7,000, but all the people that live on the site is just enormous. So we're like a catalyst, if you like, an introductor of, and our academies is a federation almost of all those people at Heathrow. So it's this interchange of opportunity and ideas, and let's share, that you really get close to what we need and what the opportunity is for the community.
Can I just ask you one thing? If sitting here as you are next to the Minister, what's the thing that you think government needs to do to help business crack this problem, you know, all about which we're hearing today?
I think I mean, for us, it's really supporting those educational colleges and whatever to have the resources and to really talk to the kids about and get them out into businesses and working with them. And I know careers advice is, you don't like that phrase, but I think really giving children the time and thought about their careers, and also this whole thing about parity, that, you know, we want talent, and apprentices aren't the poor relation. You know, they are fantastic, and we don't want teachers to think, oh well, you're not going to university, oh well, you better do an apprenticeship or something. You know, we want the educators to value our apprentices as much. If I had my girl engineer here who's just finished, she's on 25,000, and she says to all her university friends, you've got debt, I've got a job, I've got just put down my deposit now for my first house, you know, I've got a job, and you know, good on you. And she says, you know, I've always been, you know, sort of, you know, looked down on because I didn't go to college, but I've got a lot more than a lot of you have, and I'm really proud to be an engineer at Heathrow. You know, it's part of that as well.
Everyone's nodding their head here. Minister, you talked about rigour.
Yes.
Here. How do you inject this degree of rigour that everybody says they want to see in our apprenticeship scheme?
Well, it's great if everybody wants to see it, because that, you know, that the fact that that's where the conversation is a real progress and is very important.
But how do you achieve that?
Well, it's a combination of things. We achieve it through having high quality qualifications. We're going through the qualifications that are on offer and removing ones that don't have both high quality and employer support, and that's an ongoing process. And I think there's more to do in that space. It's also about the structures of our funding system, which is very complicated, and we're trying to simplify. But the best thing is to get the funding going alongside the employers putting their money in the apprenticeship system, I think. But let's not have a funding debate, because it is a highly technical but very important subject. Or full of unintended consequences. But the third part, I think, is about rigour, is about this point that we didn't actually answer in the last set of questions, which is about the workforce and who's doing the teaching. For that, it should be, you know, colleges have got an awful lot of autonomy over their workforce. But, you know, if there's more support we need to put in place. For instance, the concept of Teach 2, which came up in Frank McLaughlin's report into professionalism in the workforce in FE, which is where people who are actually doing the job spend some time also teaching. Then you get people who, instead of people who were in the industry a while ago, you get people who are in the industry now and then go and teach for part of the week. Not only are they going to be more relevant in terms of what they can teach, but they're also going to be more inspiring because they're actually doing the job during the rest of the week. And so there are things that we can do on supporting the workforce that can help drive up standards and quality as well.
Mark, just quickly, you mentioned when you talked about apprenticeships it being a sort of 40-year horizon. Do you think any of this is achievable in a quicker time frame, or how hopeful are you?
What I meant by 40-year horizon was essentially that if you're actually going to get to the level where you have your workforce looking at the sort of qualification levels you want, and to compete with, say, Germany, actually simply, since we basically invest most of our resources up front in people's lives, then it's going to take that long for it to percolate through the system. So that's why I said it's important to think about people who have perhaps left any sort of formal education and training quite a long way behind, but might need to access it again. Interesting comment there about the end about the teach too, because I think that's an example of, this is all about building an infrastructure or an ecosystem, whatever term you want to use. And the people who are really valuable in those systems, it is people, it's not institutions, and boundary spanners. People who can look at it from one perspective as well as another. And good people there are usually worth the weight in gold. And those are the sort of people you want to bring into these infrastructures. And it takes time to build. I mean, this is not short-term stuff. You can't just simply sort of wave a wand and put people in. But if you can build up the incentive structures and the capability to do that, then you can get institutions starting to become a bit more responsive to each other.
Okay. More questions, please. Gentleman there with the glasses.
Thank you. Hello, my name's John Bell. I'm actually the parliamentary candidate for Wirral South. I met Matthew up there about a week ago, but perhaps more importantly, I recently retired after 26 years teaching in secondary FE and indeed workplace training, so I've had lots of work experience in vocational training, and I'm a passionate believer in it because it was my route into higher education and a career in education. But one of my long-term concerns has always been this suggestion that there's something mutually exclusive about academic education and vocational training. And browsing through your executive summary, that seems to be reinforced, albeit it is somewhat ambiguous. Matthew Oakley mentioned before about the social need for training. There is also a need for a life outside the workplace, which education gives people. They're not just economic units. And I never believed that only people who perhaps lack the academic skills should go on into engineering or vocational education and all the rest of it. So I think it is important that everybody, whatever their chosen route later on, has a first-class, high-level education to give them a more rounded life outside of the workplace.
Do you have a question there, or?
Well, it's a comment, which I'd like you to comment on.
Okay.
I guess my point would just be what I was saying about we need a system which is more nimble, which allows people to do whatever training or education they've taken on, whether that's vocational, whatever else it is. And then, if there's no jobs in that area for 5, 10, 15 years' time, it's about being able to retrain and do different things. And that, I don't think at the moment is supported particularly well. And it's often left at the expense of the person in question to actually do that. So actually I think it's that nimble kind of responsiveness which I think would probably be the response to give to that.
Yeah, but if you start off, as you say in your summary here, that you reject the idea of parity of esteem and an alternative to academic education, that language suggests there is some split here. I don't believe there is.
We can discuss afterwards.
Lady in front there, 2 questions at the back.
Dinah Kane.
5 minutes to go, guys, if we can keep our...
Dinah Kane from Creative Skill Set. I was just wondering, particularly Matthew and Mark, whether you could comment on changing patterns of employment and relate that to the issue that you were discussing about people in mid-term careers and loans, because in our industries we're seeing obviously we're very heavily freelanced, increasing short-term contracts, so the relationship between employers and individuals becomes a different one. And in all the thinking about 40 years from now or 30 years from now or different industries emerging, the degree to which thinking about it within the paradigm of greater self-employment, temporary employment, is something that you've been factoring into your modelling and thinking.
Thank you. We'll just go to the back there and get that question.
Paul Davey from Hutchison Ports. I do have a question, a very quick observation on the apprenticeships and going to schools. one thing that we've seen, we have engineering apprenticeships at the Port of Fiddy's, our largest port. One problem we've had is that some schools don't want us to go in to talk about engineering apprenticeships because the schools are still judged and feel their job is to get children into FE and HE education. I know they used to be part funded on the basis of the number of people they got into, the number of children they got into further education. I don't know if that's still the case, but there's still a reluctance amongst some schools to actually speak to us about apprenticeships. The question I wanted to ask though was really how you feel we can sort of better align FE and HE provision in sort of regional and locally to the needs of industry locally. I think in particularly in our area we have a large logistics, transport, shipping hub. If you look at the colleges in our area though, there's not a single course designed there for transport, logistics, shipping. If children want to do that sort of course, they have to go to Liverpool or Plymouth or Cardiff, none of which are very near the East Coast, of course. And we've had great difficulty working with our education establishments to provide these sort of courses, basically because it's a difficult sell to 18-year-olds and 17-year-olds, and they're still under pressure to sort of get bums on seats. And it's much easier to fill a media studies course than it is a transport or logistics or indeed engineering course.
Well, on all three of those, I mean, it's very specifically at the in response to the last question, the best answer to getting into schools to be part of the mentoring and inspiration of kids, the best answer to opening up schools to that is Michael Wilshaw, because by God they listen to what he says far more than what I might say, and they have a new duty that was put in place a year ago, but it was only last month that Ofsted said we're going to judge you against whether you deliver on this. So that is the evidence shows that is at the moment patchy, but it's also changing and improving. But the bigger picture question, which came in all three, is about the role of schools and especially colleges within their local community and their relationships with businesses. And I want to see colleges as local social enterprises. I don't buy the argument from colleges that it's complicated because some of their funding comes from the skills funding agency for their over 18 work and apprenticeships, and from the education funding agency for their under 18 work. I want them to have literally thousands of customers bringing money to them from all over, from local employers, from local individuals, and them to be responsive to the local market. And the best colleges already do this. And colleges to be a social enterprise where I, of course, on behalf of the taxpayer, put in subsidy. But really colleges don't respond to the latest whim of the latest minister, but instead they respond to their local community. And there's an array amongst the colleges between the leading lights that do this, and I can see some principals on the front row nodding vigorously. But there's a lot more work to do, I don't, as the skills minister, I don't want to be the one that says what skills and training is necessary. Actually, I want the whole system to work and respond to the needs of employers, and colleges should see themselves as local social enterprises rather than delivery arms of the state.
What about the role you asked about short-term contracts and the impact they're having, particularly in the creative industries?
I was thinking more economy-wide in terms of your global model.
It's really interesting. So it's certainly we've seen, particularly during the recession, a kind of increased use of short hours contracts, an increase of self-employment, partly because that's how job centres push people towards those areas. But I think we'll see probably an increased use of those sorts of things in the future. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that 0 hours contracts are necessarily bad. I think it actually do provide some flexibility. The point I'd say is that this is part of I think what's important, and it comes back to the social thing, is that these form a part of a progression. So you might start off in a temporary, short hours job, and that actually then acts as a stepping stone into a longer hours job, a more permanent job if you want that, and a job that pays better so you can support your family. That then is about continuing to invest in skills as we go along, I guess, rather than...
Which points more to the loans, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
Just to add on that, I think that is part of the context, but I think equally important is what's happening on the sort of, if you want a better word, the industry side. So you think, for example, the ability of the big national broadcasters or the big national newspapers, and indeed the local press, what of it's left, to be able to actually provide that initial training. I mean, there's always been lots of freelancers in the broadcasting industry, but a lot of them cut the teeth at the BBC. So if those sort of lead providers in a sector either disappear or don't have the ability to provide that initial spurt of training that people can later on then use as freelancers, the question is, where's it going to come from?
It's 2:02. Are there any more absolute burning questions? Burning question? Do you have time?
Yes,
to
I
take?
can run over.
Okay. Two last quick questions, and then we'll ask everyone.
My name is John Price. I'm an entrepreneur, and I also run a foundation at the Merchant Tailors Company, which has about 8,000 kids at different schools. And I'm looking at the whole area of the gap between education and employment that the Minister talked to. And I'm very pleased to hear some of the language that he's using, because it's important. But just some observations. The first thing is, can you actually change the teachers' objectives so that their objective actually is measured by getting people into jobs, not into tertiary education, number one. Question number two, can you actually provide grants to those schools to actually get some specialist teachers whose job it is to actually spend some time in industry trying to find out what it is that they need, and actually equally getting the industries to actually understand what they need to tell people, what's required. The third thing is, can you start a bit younger? Because actually we talked to the National Association of Head Teachers, they say the most receptive time for someone is actually when they're between 11 and 13, where they don't have some beastly exam. So can you bring it down to a much younger age to get better results? Thank you.
And the last question.
Hello, my name is Hassan Sajad. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Manchester, and I wanted you to think about this topic with regards to the north-south divide. So what's shown in Greater Manchester is the area that is most affected by the downturn, and St Albans in Hertfordshire is the area that is least affected by the downturn. And I wanted you to think about this with regards to regional differences and the north-south divide.
Interesting. Do you want to take both those points? Yeah.
I'm very happy to. Vocational education and getting people the skills to do jobs and resolving some of the long-standing problems in the labour market is not about any particular region of the country, it's about the whole country. So in that sense, my response to the north-south divide issue is that we've got to make sure everybody can reach their potential. And of course that may mean doing more in areas where there are more problems, but with the goal that everybody gets the training that they need and the support they need, and sometimes we have to be tough in providing that support as well. But on the goal of the teachers and getting people into jobs and HE and having a grant for teachers to do this or that, that is not our approach at all. Our goal is, yes, to change the system so the incentives are that heads of schools and colleges have incentives to improve the destinations of the children and adults under their teaching, to go into jobs, but also into HE. This is not that jobs are better than HE by any stretch, or even that apprenticeships are better than HE. It's that there should be a choice between the two, and then give those leaders of those institutions the tools and the capability and the freedom to manage their organisations to drive standards. So I don't want to be telling one individual teacher what their incentive structure should be. I put the incentive structure on the head and hold them rigorously to account, both for getting people into work, into apprenticeships, into HE, and of course good exam results, but then give them the freedom to deliver, because by that way we can harness the abilities of literally thousands of people with their leadership skills in their local area, in their schools, in their colleges or groups of colleges, in order to drive up standards. Because we have seen that if you try to drive that by central direction, then you get precisely the opposite of what you're intending to achieve.
Can we just round up now? We'll ask every speaker just to give one last thought in summary.
perhaps just one point you would like the audience to take home with them, or something that has particularly struck you about the comments today?
I think for us at Heathrow, I think just being closer to the education and the local community is really the heart, that close dialogue and understanding between us of what's needed and the opportunity that we can give for the kids.
Matthew, on the end?
I want to actually respond to Hassan, so it'll be a final point, but it'll be a response that I don't think this is a north-south thing at all. I think you see problems across the country with this. You speak to Jaguar Land Rover, they have problems as much as people who are doing stuff in London and the South East. They're constantly complaining that their supply chain doesn't have the right kind of skills, doesn't have the right kind of people in there, and they're taking all of their best people because they're struggling to kind of keep up with the demand they're generating. And so this is a complete national thing. It's a complete UK-wide thing, which we need to be, as the Minister was saying, we need to be tackling on a UK-wide basis.
I think this debate puts more onus on both colleges and schools and on employers, and simply that we have to remember that capacity and capability in those areas to engage with others is limited, given that they've also got the day job to do, and it's going to take time to actually sort of build that capability. So these are sort of slow fuse policies.
Parliamentary Minister.
Well, I agree with that, but I would say that these sorts of activities we've been talking about are the day job for colleges. They're not done as well as the day job for education providers. But really, I'd leave on this. It's very easy to talk about how wonderful it would be to have parity of esteem, and it's very easy to talk about wanting to make sure everybody gets the very best education, and these things are very important, and frankly I talk about them a lot as well. But you can't will the ends without willing the means, and willing the means means taking a cold hard look at the system and making sure that every part of it performs as well as the best parts do, and in fact even the best parts perform better. So we're both, I'm a huge supporter of the system and the people in it, but I'm also, I hope, a big challenge to them to improve, and it's very, very practical, the steps you need to take to turn what there's broad consensus over the goal, but getting there requires some tough decisions and some drive and determination. But I hope that, although it will take us time, I hope we're broadly on the right track.
Great. Just all that remains for me to say is thank you very much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed it. It seems to me that the same issues and concerns persist around skills and education and training, but there does seem to be an open door in terms of communicating those issues, and it certainly seems the Minister wants to hear what you have to say and is in the mood for change and shaking up the system. So while he's here, as he said today, grab him, talk to him, at least while his consultation is open for a few more hours, even though it's on the complex issue of funding. But still, take advantage, and thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.